Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third episode of the Pacific Northwest Art Laboratory podcast. And today we are joined by Dakota Dean and Kimberly Adams, who I had no idea were very close friends. And so today we're going to get to know them, their story. This episode is mostly focused on getting to know Dakota Dean, which, if you don't know already, is an amazing artist who does these stencil works that are just absolutely crazy. Center around this message of mental health and trying to bring about an awareness of it. And I think that's just truly an inspirational thing to do. I'm really excited for you guys to get to listen to this podcast. So without further ado, here we go. So welcome to our third segment. Here we're joined today with Dakota and Kimberly Adams.
Hello.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about basically your journey as an artist. And I think the best way to start is with what got you into doing art in the first place.
Well, one day I had this terrible job. I hated it. Some people might not have hated it as much.
He was working for me.
I was working for her. I had this crazy boss lady. You ruined my spoiler moment, right? I had this absolutely crazy boss lady that just came in one day and she was like, I need you to take my keys and see me out of my office because I'm going to quit and become a finger painter. And I was like, we're allowed to do that?
That's an option.
That's an option?
Very accurate.
So this is a fairly true part of this story, actually. So
It sounds made up, but that is 100% exactly what happened.
yeah. She really did just come in one day. She's like, I'm going to be a finger painter. And I was like, she is crazy. But no, it was like that time in my life, I was going through like not knowing what I wanted to do. I hated my job and I hated like working for other people and working for companies whose values I did not align with. And so in the process of taking some time off between that job and my next job, is really when I started playing with art and started discovering what I was capable of in those mediums, and I just fell in love with it. I did get a job after that, but 6 months or a year through into that job, I'd still been, since I'd started creating in the break between the two, I just kept creating and realized, like one day at work that I spent my entire day at work like thinking about my next creative projects. And so it very quickly became apparent that I was never going to get any work done if I wasn't working on my art. So I, started slowly making a plan to just quit the job and phase the work for other people out and start working like for myself and my own creative passions.
That's really awesome. Do you think having that time allotted while you're working your other job kind of helped you create more ideas for projects, or were you just like creating ideas all the time and you're just super excited to get into doing those projects immediately?
Like that time was like very therapeutic. Like the pieces that I made during those times were all like, they were humorously like about, corporate culture and like I was doing a lot of stuff like collaging Monopoly money onto canvases and stuff, and having like people in suits like with guns to their heads, like they were happily committing suicide, things like that. Like it was, humorously dark. But,
things you think about when you're working a corporate job.
Yeah, exactly. So, but no, I mean, it was just like, I think that creativity is a habit, and when you start creating things, then ideas just snowball, right? And the more you create, the more it snowballs. And so, as one thing led to another and led to another. And I think like the big project that kind of like got me realizing how much I just loved creating started, like the concept of it started in that time. And it was kind of like a funny moment to me, but I was making these, I was playing around between both photography and paint. And I started making these clouds. I wanted to do these photo shoots. I'd seen it on Instagram somewhere. There were these cool lamps that were clouds that kind of look like thunderstorms, right? Yeah,
I've seen the TikTok everywhere.
Yep. And I was like, I want to make some of these, but photograph them. But they never photographed well because they're very dark and in dark rooms, and it looks like it would photograph well, but it doesn't. So I started playing around with things, and I ended up putting like strobes inside these giant like 4-foot clouds that I'd made. And Kimberly probably remembers these pictures. I think she has one of them. But so I started doing this massive project with these. I mean, it snowballed, and for like months I was playing with these clouds and photographing them. And then one day my boss came in. I was at the job, and I don't think he knew about the cloud project, but he did. He came and chewed me out, and told me like my head's always in the clouds, and I was like, that's really funny. And so, so I ended up naming that whole series of like photos and stuff like My Head in the Clouds. And but I don't like.
That's great.
I digress. Like, yes.
Because I get asked this, and so I'm very curious about your journey. When you are in this corporate world and you have this, let's just call it kind of this steady income, it's scary to leave that comfort and kind of take that leap into something that might be inconsistent, because we always doubt ourselves. Are we going to make it? Am I going to be good enough? We have these self-sabotage moments. So what gave you the courage to take that leap? Because I think a lot of people who are thinking about being artists, they kind of hold themselves in that place.
I think, a handful of people that I looked up to having more faith in me than I had in myself helped, for sure. You being one of them, my stepdad being one of them, like, one of my tenants at the job that I was at the time when I really did kind of quit, is all these people encouraging me and telling me like that I could do it. Like, so I tried to grasp onto that because I didn't believe it internally, but I tried to be like, if other people do, then obviously like there's a mentality shift. But I also find it interesting. I was like literally right before I was here, YouTube, I play like, information videos on YouTube on shuffle. And right before I was here, there was one on Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And part of one of his concepts is you need to burn the ships. And he bases it on, I don't remember the actual historical figures because I'm not a details person, but there was like some warlord and they went to go wage war on a different continent. They had to take boats there. And when they got there, he made them burn all of the boats. Right. And then he like looked at his troops and told them, so now we have no choice. We either win or we don't go home. Like, and so that's one of Napoleon Hill's concepts of like, from Think and Grow Rich, is you have to burn the boats, right? If you don't like take away the option to retreat, you will always retreat. And so for me, it was when I made the jump, right? I still have some part-time work that I do, but it is 100% not enough to sustain me. And I'm very conscious to keep it that way. And I made that jump to where if I don't create and I don't generate revenue from what I'm creating, then I don't survive. And I think that is the massive thing that has pushed me, right? Is not being like, is knowing that I can't have the things that I want. I can't pay my rent. I can't, spend money on leisure or going out to dinner or any of these things if I don't produce it with my art. Right?
Do you feel like that kind of like pressures you to make art that you normally wouldn't make otherwise? Or do you find that you just have...
Well, yes and no. I don't know. It pressures me to make more art for sure, which I would never consider as an artist a bad thing. Anything you can do to motivate yourself to create more is very good. So it doesn't... But if you're meaning it in a way, like, does it pressure me to create art that is like not consistent with what I would want to make? I don't think that is accurate. I think that it just pressures me to create.
Okay.
It's very courageous.
Yeah, I was going to say, even for myself, like, I feel a little bit confident in my art, but to be where you're at and on your level, like taking that leap of faith and burning all those ships and bridges, it's kind of like you kind of seem like a fairy tale type thing going on, but there's a lot of people that do that, and I think it's really admirable.
Well, there's one other thing that you did courageous that kind of ties into that. So that tenacity, or whatever it is, that push, that drive, that tenacity, that gave yourself permission to take that leap. Because when you were on the news, you did something, because I've watched your career from, pre-career to the beginning, and kind of all the different shapes inside. And that journey, I've had a really great seat in watching it evolve. But I think one of my favorite moments of your art was when you were on television, because there's a lot of mental health issues going on. I have it in my family. It touches all of us. It affects all of us. I thought that was really amazing, because you went on television and you're talking about your art, but you have this passion about, I'm going to expose my whole self, and I'm going to put myself out here. And I know, as with my family, I've even used you as an example, because I think people see you and they see you as successful and they enjoy your personality, and you're like living your best life. But then here's, at the same time, you're very honest about who you are. And I think that makes it very comfortable for others to accept who they are. I just thought that was such a great moment. Did you feel that when you're going on to speak about that topic?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. It's interesting that you define that as like as an important moment. I think the moment for me, I agree. I think that everything that you said and just talked about was an important moment for me. But I think it happened. Everybody else sees those moments after they actually happen. And so like me being on the news was like after that moment happened, I think, and what I was talking about on the news, right? But so for me, it was like I had a very rough like mental breakdown. I was very, very depressed. I was really having a hard time dealing with it for like several years. And when I finally started understanding like self-acceptance and self-love. And I started using that as like a topic for a lot of my art. One of the things that I learned very quickly that was like a big aha for me was that when you're going through any kind of mental health issue, whether it be good or bad, like we tend to have this pressure from society that like you should only, when you're in a good mental state, that's the only time you should share it. And that perpetuates a lot of problems. And what I started to realize is once I started to just vocalize, like very unapologetically, the negative mental spaces that I was in and use those as topics for my art, that it wasn't just me that needed to do that. It was an absurd amount of people needed to hear it from other people, right? So the sharing of yourself goes two ways. Like, you know, there's the personal therapy of being able to get it off your chest, but then there's the reciprocity, I guess, there's all the people that need to know they're not alone in feeling that way, that need to hear somebody else say they're going through it to feel normalized as well. Yes. And so it's very, that was when I started to realize it's like very selfish. It's a very selfish thing to do, to like hold back who you are. And there's a lot of people, I think when you haven't gone through that, it's hard to understand that. It seems like this selfish, like pontificating thing that people say when they're like, I'm just unapologetically me. But it's not about being you for you. I mean, it is, but it's so much larger than that. You know, you need to be you for everybody else. Like, it does the world a huge service to be yourself, whether that's good or bad, or whether you're in a bad mental state or a good mental state. You know, like everybody needs to, and especially in the world right now where everything's so fake, everything is, you know, people are fake on social media, everything is so diluted, and it's easy to get online and get caught up in other people's lives and think they're living these perfect lives. And people need to hear that people are normal, and that the way they feel is normal, and that not living this perfect life that you can show on Instagram is normal. Like,
I love that you say that it's accepting all the dimensions of being a human. And I can relate to this because I remember the first time, I have a mom of two children, and I remember one time I had a series of events that kind of led me to kind of lose my cool. And I remember how embarrassed I was to kind of lose that in front of my children, when I'm always put together, always on point, always have the right things to say. And I remember calling my mom, and I was so upset. I was like, I can't believe I did that in front of my kids. And she told me something very similar to this. And she said, your kids need to see that it's okay to be upset. People need to see that you have emotion. People need to see, and I like that it's not that it per se is normal, not normal. It's just humans. And I think of when Adam was diagnosed with Crohn's, and I remember he might potentially have this the sack that he has to wear, and I remember Googling images, and you see these beautiful women out there posing in their bikini bottoms, and they have, and they're just and they're just like it. And I'm like, I'm so glad that individuals have courage to do that, because then it allows other who may be struggling to kind of be held out.
A role model.
And art kind of does that in a way. But you know, Jacob, you have this story too, because I've known you. And I get to see you be your whole self. And I think that is something very inspiring as well, because you are unapologetic you. And you always show up as you, whatever you feel like that day. And it's really cool, because I think your artwork is that way as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why I love being in this group of people and getting to know all you guys, because you all have kind of like similar stories where your art has been an extension of yourself, or has been a way of like reaching out and getting into touch with a part of yourself that you probably weren't as in touch with before. Like, before you quit Paxson. Sorry, so I always get it mixed up.
So that's where Dakota and I worked together with Paxson.
Yeah, and so I think it is great, and like you're saying, like allowing yourself to take a step forward allows people who are behind you, waiting for you, who look up to you maybe as a role model, to do that, and then they see it. Oh, it's okay for me to do that myself. Yeah, there's a lot of, and I feel like even as a mom, there's even more pressure from the world to be perfect and to hide those like kind of imperfections, like, because you don't just have the pressure, you have to be a good person in general, but you also have to be a good person so your kids have this perfect role model for themselves. But they do need to see that you kind of everyone goes through emotions, and it's the coming back from it, it's expressing and then dealing with it. That's really important as well.
Exactly. Those are lessons to be had in there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so the journey that, so if I can kind of speak a little, so when you first started, there was a name that we called your photography, because it was almost like, even though it was photography, it was almost like
conceptual
photography. Thank you. I knew there was a name, because it's the same thing that you'd see in a painting. It was telling a story, but he was doing that with photography. And I do own one of your, it's my favorite.
I have to see these now. I need to put a visual up for
But I also think that you took that same thing through your art, because when you first started creating your urban street art, it did have this messaging, and I think that's why it's all encompassing.
Well, my first paintings that I made were based off of photos from some of those photos, right? Like one of the first, I look back and there was like an initial batch of like 4 or 5 paintings that I made that like when I was experimenting and trying to learn how to do this style. And contrary to what a lot of people think, like I never grew up knowing how to draw or how to paint, like, and I don't believe that that's like a precursor to being an artist. Like I started playing around with specific mediums and specific limitations and just grew within this one branch. And I think that anybody is capable of doing that. But when I look back, like the first like 4 or 5 paintings that I started making when I was playing this, like 3 of those 4 are based off of photos that I took in that time period. And I think my transition from photography was just a simple, I know it's kind of silly, but it was a monetary thing. It's that people are willing to pay more money for like hand created art than they are for photographs. And I noticed that very quickly. Like people wouldn't buy my photographs as quickly as they buy my paintings. And I liked doing them equally as much. And so I just came to the decision, like if I want to be able to support myself doing one, like I'm going to follow the one that people are more interested in.
So being that we're in an art therapy lab, do you feel like your art helps with that mental state and help kind of express kind of these inner feelings?
Oh yeah. Art is like 100% something that I do for myself. Like, which is hard to reconcile sometimes when you're trying to run a business. But I don't make art because I think other people need art. I make art because I need to make art. It's 100% like my happy place. Like the best thing that I can do is disappear for a couple months and just paint and make things. And it's an exploration of like, it challenges myself in the right ways. Like, and I think to me, it's 2 things combined. It's the creative aspect of making art, but it's also like the independence of owning your own business, right? And it's that you get to do things on your terms. Like there are ways I could change my process to make it a lot easier and a lot quicker and a lot more streamlined to where I could probably produce more and better work. But I don't have to do that or want to do that, because to me, it's about like art is about setting challenges for yourself, right? So if it might be harder for me to make my art this way, but that's the way I want to make it because that's the challenge that's entertaining to me at the time, right? Like maybe I need to disappear into something that is tedious and takes a long time to make, right? Maybe I don't want to just quickly create something, and maybe I want to explore like ideas about depression, and maybe that helps me come to terms with my own depression, or maybe I want to, explore ideas about personal acceptance and love, and that helps me, find that in a time when I need it. Art is about me doing it the way I want to do it to satisfy my own needs at the time. And owning my own business is that, I get to make decisions that aren't always 100% like about the bottom line. They're about like what is valuable to me outside of money, and so art has that intrinsic value to me. My business, the way I run it, I make sure it feeds the intrinsic needs that I need just as much as it makes revenue.
And so you're painting that legalized feelings.
Yeah.
Is this kind of portray like your expression through your art is trying to portray that message of?
Yeah, is that you should be able to just be open. That painting came from a very specific situation that I got in, where it was when I was that same time period when I told you I was dealing with depression and all of these things. Is I'd kept it hidden for so long because I felt like I was obligated to. I felt like I would be a burden on other people, the people that I cared about. Like I felt like people wouldn't like my art, right? Like I want to keep it happy because people want happy art. Like and my family wouldn't want to be around me. My friends wouldn't want to be around me. And so I started making these very moody pieces. Yeah, and I remember when I even created that. After going to therapy and learning how to process these things and be open about it, I realized that a vast majority of the reason I was depressed was because I felt like I had to be, that I couldn't be openly emoting that I was depressed, right? The issues would have resolved themselves a lot sooner had I just let myself talk about them, right? And had I been able to connect to some other people and say like, oh, I feel this way, and it was surprising that I'd hear like the people that I was looking up to and the people that I was closest to be like, oh, I feel that way too often. And so I made that painting, the Legalized Feelings painting, and I remember making it thinking, this is so stupid. Like there's like nobody's gonna like this. And I remember too, I showed it to my roommate, who's somebody who at the time he's somebody who I look up to very, very much creatively. He's a brilliant creative person, and we have a very good creative feedback loop between the two of us. And I remember I showed him the painting, and he just said the same thing. He's like, "That is so dumb," and he was like, "That is going to hang on a wall, and nobody's going to touch it." And I brought it to a show the next weekend because I didn't have a lot of stuff, and it sold within like 20 minutes. And since then, it has been probably the number 2 selling like design piece of artwork that I've ever made. Like it hits way too many people. It's interesting. It's interesting how that works. I constantly rub that in his face anytime I can.
Well, sometimes we try to overthink things, and versus just letting things be. And it's the ones that we just let be are the ones that end up being the most popular.
Yeah, and you never know who you're going to reach with your artwork too. Like it didn't appeal to. It's not like it didn't appeal to your roommate at first, but obviously it appealed to someone because it sold so fast.
Yeah.
So, but I'm kind of curious, for those who don't know, can you describe your art process and what type of art you do?
Absolutely. So I'm a spray paint and stencil artist. Well, I guess I'm technically a mixed media artist. I work with collage, but I don't really consider that like the foundation of my art. I collage my canvases with like newspaper articles, and the biggest reason I do that is just because I like the texture and the look, right? I just don't like the texture of canvas itself or panels. I just want some grit and stuff in the background. But on top of that, yeah, everything I do is spray paint and stencil. So I basically, I'll like hand draw illustrations and then cut those illustrations into multi-layered stencils. They, depending on the complexity of the piece, if I'm lucky and in a very proficient day, I can make like a 4-layer stencil, but most of the time lately they tend to be like 10, 12, 15 layers of stencils.
Oh, wow.
So I have to, I layer the stencils, use spray paint. It's a very limiting medium because you work within the limitations of like what you can make with a stencil, and you work within the limitations of color palette in that spray paint isn't something you can mix before you put it in the can. So like if this color doesn't work out, you can't just be like, I'm going to add a little white to it and lighten it, or I'm going to add a little yellow to it and warm it up. You have to use the color as it comes out of the can. And so you have fixed color palettes, fixed abilities. You're working within constraints. And I actually kind of like that. I think that those constraints like breed creativity. They help me like push limits and come up with new things that I wouldn't have come up with before. So
that's really cool. And is that something that came to you intuitively, like making the stencils and then knowing how to use the spray paint in a certain order, or is that something you learned along the way?
No, that was a lot of trial and error. Yeah, yeah. A lot of YouTube tutorials, like a lot of looking, because and even now, like I'm 6 years into doing stencils, there's still, I look out and see like the stencil art tutorials out there, and they just like are not like, I couldn't find anybody that did things the way that I wanted to do them. I found people that I could emulate kind of, but I was kind of on my own figuring out how to get there. And yeah, there was a lot of trial and error, like learning with spray paint. Like I've had to write down lists of things that I've learned along the way about my process. Like, silly things like I can't paint layers too quick. If I get excited about a painting and I start putting layers on too quick, the next thing I'll do is I'll pull a stencil off and the paint will be too wet and sticky. It won't have cured, and half the painting will peel off with it, right? Or knowing when to use like weights on the stencils and when not to use weights on the stencils, and how thick to use the paint. Like, I mean, there's a lot to it. Yeah, you forget when you're perfecting a craft, like you forget all of the little things that you learn along the way that perfect the craft. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff to learn, and a lot of stuff that I forget that I learned, and especially when you teach somebody, that's like the crazy thing, right? Have you ever had a student and you start trying to be like, no, it's easy, you just do this, and they're like, I don't get it, and then you have to take a step back and be like, I had to learn I had to learn this part, right? It's intuitive now, but it never was, or it didn't start out that way, I guess.
I describe that as writing your name. When people say, I'm not good at art, or I can't even draw a stick figure, I think perseverance.
I still say that.
Passion.
People are like, man, I bet you can, and I'll be like, no, I really.
it's persistence and passion that is what that's why those that are passionate about basketball, if they continue to push through and persevere, they can become pro basketball. I think with the arts, we all learned how to write our name. And the very first time we picked up a crayon pen or whatever we used, our name probably didn't come out right. The letters were probably crooked, and we didn't have a lot of control, and then some of the letters probably backwards. Who knows? But as we continue to keep writing our name, the more control we have. And that's why I think when people say they're not talented, it's like, it's not as much talented. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but I focus more on it's just effort. Perseverance and passion that helps you do it over and over again until you get a little bit more control and more intuitive.
Well, I think that, like, I love your analogy, but there's one part that I dislike about it, which is the comparison to professional sports, right? Because I think that art, unlike professional sports, there is a genetic and raw talent attribute. Like there's, like if you're 5'3", nothing you do, no amount of training or perseverance is going to help you dunk or be able to jump over LeBron.
This is not going to age well when Kim becomes a pro.
Yeah, I know, right?
I've heard Prince was a pretty good basketball player.
Yeah, but you know, my point being with art, I think it's a little different, right? Because art is a mental, right? Art is subjective. Art isn't about physical, you know, your physical. So I think that raw talent is less of a prerequisite. And so I think your metaphor was accurate. I just think that, like, the comparison to sports, right? Like, anybody can become an artist. Like, you know, not everybody can become a professional athlete. There's no way for me to become a professional. Like, none of us in this room, like, could become a professional athlete. I don't care how good our positive mental attitude is.
Well, I see that. That's kind of separating the physical versus the mental side of things.
Yeah.
The mental is more of that perseverance.
Correct.
Versus
Yeah.
passion versus. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, you don't need the talent for art. I'm just trying to back you up, but also like.
But
make your own stand.
At the same time. I don't even like sports. Like, this isn't like a sports or sport. It's just me saying, like, no, I don't want people to feel like to have to make those comparisons and have to, like, if anybody would take back and justify, well, but to be Michael Jordan, you have to, you know, like, you know, it's
I
like,
never
no,
played sports,
art is,
so I don't know.
Art is different. Art is yes, absolutely. Anybody has the capacity to create, right? And the key is not judging what you create, right? Yeah. Because basketball, sports are measured by factual stats, right? LeBron James is the best basketball player in history, period. Those are factual stats. Like, statistically, you can show every stat that shows LeBron James is the best basketball player in history. Who's the best artist in history?
There's so many.
There's so many, and there's none. Because you can't. There are no stats that can say this artist is the best artist in history, right? You can never quantify art. It's an intrinsic.
It is subjective.
It's an intrinsic thing.
But on that note, though, do you think that, I feel like in the same way that there's, like, statutes and limitations for, like, anyone getting into playing basketball, do you think that there's the same for anyone who's trying to get into art? Because I feel like for me, or actually I'm a bad example because I've always been doing art ever since I was a kid, but there's a lot of people out there who are like, they've either been told because of their gender or because of their age or because of, like, whatever other things are going on in their life that they can't do this thing, or they can't look to art as an outlet, especially for mental health services, because they don't believe that mental health is a real thing, or that people should be, like, pursuing art in a professional manner. Because I feel like a lot of people have to overcome those challenges too.
I don't feel like there are any barriers to entry to art. I feel like if you want to finger paint, you can finger paint, right? Like, if you have I have shaky hands, I have poor hand-eye coordination. I cannot draw a stick figure, and that is a fact. I could. Everybody can draw a stick figure, but everybody else's stick figures will be better than my stick figures, right? Like, but again, that's subjective, right? The fun thing about art, the fun thing around the way I've developed my style, I know how I am able to learn how to work around my weaknesses and play to my strengths, right? Like, you can. Art can be so many things. It can be anything and everything. And so I think there are no barriers to entry, because there's no hard definition of what is art. And likewise, there's no definition of what is good art. Good art is what you enjoy and what somebody else enjoys.
Well, when I teach finger painting classes, because I have a lot of adults, and I hear the stories that may be barriers or maybe perceived barriers. I think that's more of a better word.
Yeah.
Because what they will say is, I took an art class, or when I was in school, either someone criticized them, or maybe they over-criticized their own creativity, and they just, for whatever reason, didn't do it and didn't think they were very good at it. So now they're retired, maybe they're widowed, or, you know, divorced, or wherever life puts you later in a separate chapter, it's like they think, okay, you know what, I'm going to give art a try. So finger painting just seems more approachable. Yeah. So I hear some of these barriers, and it's often that I can't paint or I'm not talented. But if you really peel back the onion and kind of peel back the layers of what it is, it's like they have this insecurity, and it's either someone else made them feel that way or they project it on themselves. And so I feel like as an art teacher, I try to encourage, like, hey, don't make it look like mine. Mine already exists. Create your own style. And it sounds like, for Cody and Jacob, you guys both did this. You created your own individual style, and you gave yourself permission to, like, hey, I don't have to create something that already exists. I'm putting this out there for me, like you had just said, for me.
Yeah. And I guess that's probably like the biggest challenge as an art teacher, right? Is trying to get people who are normally not already in that mindset to feel comfortable enough to do something like that? Or do you feel like most people who come to you already know and are ready to just dive in?
The students that are more open-minded tend to be, they just jump right in. But there are some that, they have to know exactly where to put the paint, and that's okay. I can help get them there, but eventually I feel like it's my task to, okay, eventually you're going to have to walk this journey on your own and put the paint where you feel like it needs to go. Because this isn't a Kimberly Adams painting. This is a, Susie Q's painting. This is your painting. But I think that, that's part of just picking up on, maybe what someone's might be feeling and giving them that safe place. Like, hey, it's okay. And then even being vulnerable myself and saying, I'm not perfect. Every time I go to a canvas, I don't create a masterpiece. Heavens no. My garage is full of a whole bunch of oopsies.
The painting graveyard.
Yeah, the painting graveyard. Well, one of the things that you were talking about, your finger painting is very approachable, but when you think about your type of art, that stencil art, because to me that, when you're using a computer, you're using this aid, but that is not easy. I know I've reached out to you just for some basic help on some things on the computer. That in itself is a challenge.
I think my point wasn't that. I think my point was that there's challenges in whatever medium you want to pick.
Yeah.
There are challenges and constraints, and there's the ability to create something incredible, right? If you want to, if you want to finger paint, I mean, for those of you who are listening to this and have not seen Kimberly's finger paintings, they are masterpieces. They're incredible works of art, right?
But that is subjective.
And it is subjective, and it's my opinion, but that's there are so many tools available to us as artists, and there are so many options available to us as artists that we do not need. The possibilities are endless, is what I'm saying. Like the ways to enter this are endless, and the outcome, the results that you can create are endless. And to me, that's one of the amazing things about art, right? So.
The art of writing, the art of cooking, the art of creating anything.
That's true.
With that being said, we've reached the end of our podcast for today. If you are definitely unsatisfied with the duration of this one, don't you worry, because in our next segment, we have an 1.5 hour long podcast with Kimberly Adams and Dakota Dean back again, this time focusing on Kimberly and her journey. So stick with us, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.